Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Masechta Shabbos Daf Kufran Zayin is the final Daf in the Masechta. Contains a number of different sugyas. First of all, it is ending a discussion of Hilchos Mukta, whether we hold like Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Shimon, and what the various Amirayim hold. The Gemara will discuss that. Then we get to the final Mishnah, which discusses canceling vows on Shabbos and measuring things on Shabbos, and also a little bit about sealing up windows on Shabbos. The Gemara will try to understand the details of when you're allowed to cancel vows, when you're allowed to measure, and we end off with an interesting story, which the Gemara tries to explain, where you could learn 3 halachos about these 3 sugyas, and the Gemara has one final incident, which is a bit difficult to understand, but Chayim do explain it. So let's begin. So first of all, the Gemara wants to figure out what Rabbi Yochanan holds in the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon about Muktzah. Again, that machlokes is that according to Rabbi Shimon, anything which was useful at the beginning of Shabbos remains not Muktzah. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it has to be useful for this purpose. If its purpose changes from one to another, then it is Muktzah. So the Gemara has said that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Shimon. Now the Gemara says, well, hold on a second. I have 3 proofs that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yochanan always holds like a stam mishnah, a mishnah without an author, or Beis Hillel. And we see 3 stam mishnayos without authors that all seem to indicate like Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara will explain one by one why they're not a proof. The first one is discussing a beam of wood. So a beam which is used for construction is not firewood. If it changes to firewood on Yom Tov, its changed purpose. It should be muktzah according to Rabbi Yehuda, not according to Rabbi Shimon. Now, a mission that says that you can't use a beam on Yom Tov, but if a beam broke on Yom Tov, then you still can't use it. So why not? Once it's broken, it's now become firewood. So this clearly shows, like Rabbi Yehuda, that even though it broke and changed purpose, it's still muktzah. It says Rabbi Yochanan did not have that mishnah as a stam mishnah without an author. In his version of that mishnah, it ended off in saying this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, the next proof, again, the Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yehuda from a stam mishnah is which one that says that you are allowed to use straw for firewood on Yom Tov. The Gemara assumes this is talking about rotten straw which you can't feed your animal, but you can't use wood which is in your storage shed. So the Gemara says, well, why can't you use wood that's in the storage shed, even though it's not set aside for burning according to Rabbi Shimon? As long as it has a purpose, you could use it. Must be like Rabbi Yehuda, that you can't change its purpose from construction wood to firewood on Yom Tov. So Gemara says, no, that's referring to expensive cedar wood, which is muktzah ma'achas chisar and kiss. People would never use it for anything other than expensive construction. Even Rabbi Shimon would agree. So this doesn't prove like Rabbi Yehuda. And then the third Mishnah is talking about slaughtering animals on a Yom Tov. You're allowed to slaughter on a Yom Tov, but it depends what type of animal. An animal which usually comes home to roost every night is not muktzah, because you expect it to be within your tchum on Yom Tov at some point when it comes back to sleep. However, a wild animal that usually sleeps outside the tchum, so that is muktzah, should be. At least according to Rabbi Yehuda, it should be, because you didn't expect it to be slaughterable. You didn't expect it to be made into food on Yom Tov. You expect it to just remain alive. So Gemara says, we have this Mishnah that says that you are allowed to slaughter domestic animals which come home to sleep, but you're not allowed to slaughter the ones which are wild and do not come home to sleep. Again, like Rabbi Yehuda. So this time the Gemara says you're right. That one does go like Rabbi Yehuda, but there's a different Mishnah which goes like Rabbi Shimon, and that's why Rabbi Yochanan paskins like Rabbi Shimon, and that Mishnah is actually Machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai about the bones and shells which are left on the table on Shabbos. Those are no longer human food. When they're part of the meat and the chicken and the nuts, so then it's considered part of the human food. However, once you've eaten the food out of it and just the bones and the shells are left behind, you can still feed that to your animals, but you can't eat that yourself, and therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's not muktzah because it still has a function, it's animal food, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, it is muktzah because it just changed from human food to animal food. And we have a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says, at least according to our first version, that it is muktzah. Beis Shammai says it's not muktzah, but Rav Nachman says switch it. And Beis Hillel is really the one who says it's not muktzah. So you see that Beis Hillel is going like Rabbi Shimon, and that's why Rabbi Yochanan wants to paskin like Beis Hillel and like Rabbi Shimon. Okay, now the Gemara discusses the halacha in the other machloks between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon in Hilchos Shabbos. They had many machloks in, and we have Rav Acha and Ravina arguing over what the halacha is. So we don't know who said what, but one of them said the halacha is always like Rabbi Shimon except for muksa machmas miyus. Muksa was something which is disgusting, where the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, and that's referring to a lamp, a clay jug which held oil. That's disgusting. It gets blackened, and therefore that's mukta. The other one says no, the halacha in that is like Rabbi Shimon. The only case where the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda is for muksa machmas iser, or something in the beginning of Shabbos he couldn't move because it was forbidden because of other isurim, like a lamp which is burning, you can't move because you may end up putting the lamp out or burning brighter, and therefore it says muksa the entire Shabbos. That is a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, and there we pass on like Rabbi Yehuda that it does stay muksa the entire Shabbos. Now, the Gemara here points out that everybody agrees, both Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, that muksa machmas chesaron kiss, something which you wouldn't use because it's too expensive. You don't want it to get injured or damaged. So that type of thing is muksa according to everybody, and that's a Mishnah, straight out. The Mishnah says that every useful object is not muksa except for a very large saw and the big peg that you use to hitch your plow to the animal. Those two things are things that you are very careful with. You would never use it for anything other than its stated purpose, and therefore it's muksa machmas chesaron kiss, and it remains muksa. We now begin the last Mishnah in Masechah Shabbos, which discusses the halachas of repealing a neder, a vow which one made on Shabbos, and measuring things on Shabbos. So the first half, first of all, is getting rid of a neder, a vow. Now there are two types of ways in which one can remove a neder. There's hafara and hatara. Hafara means that a woman can have her vow removed by her husband, or if she's a nara, by her father. That is only if he says that I'm removing your neder, and he says it within either the day she made it or 24 hours from when she made it. The Gemara will discuss that machlokas. And he can do so without a reason. He could just say, I'm getting rid of the neder, I'm canceling it, and he doesn't have to have an explanation, he doesn't have to find some hole in the neder, it's fine. The other type is called hatara. Hatara applies to anybody, but in order to do that you have to go to a beis din or a chacham, and you have to find an excuse, a reason why you made the neder under false circumstances and you thought something wouldn't be as difficult as it is. That's called hatara. Now, the Mishnah speaks about both hafara and hatara. It says you're allowed to do hafaras nadarim, the husband or the father is allowed to cancel the woman's. And then it says you're allowed to do hataras nadarim but then it says only if it's needed for Shabbos. If the neder was against something that you need for Shabbos, you're allowed to do it for Shabbos. Just to do it on Shabbos without a reason, we don't do because that's considered extra tircha. Now the Gemara is not sure whether that limitation that it has to be needed for Shabbos goes back on hafara or only on hatara. Okay, we'll discuss that. Now, the second half of the Mishnah discusses measuring. So you're not supposed to measure on Shabbos lest you come to write, but certain circumstances in which you are allowed to, like for a mitzvah or a halacha. So if you have a cloth that was tamei possibly, and it touched something else, it may have been metame there, but you need to know if the cloth was large enough to be mekabel tumah, depending on what the cloth is made out of. That's 3 fingers by 3 fingers, or 3 tfachim by 3 tfachim. So you're allowed to measure the cloth. You're allowed to measure a mikvah to see if it's large enough. If it contains 40 sah, that's 3 cubic amos. And the Gemara now has a story here. It's actually the Mishnah in the days of the father of Rabbi Tzadok, and the days of Abishol ben Batnis, that they took a clay jug and they sealed a hole, and they tied a reed onto another clay item to check the size of a hole in a barrel. The Gemara is going to explain what this was all about. And based on that, we learned that for a mitzvah, you're allowed to stuff up holes in windows, you're allowed to measure, and you're allowed to tie strings. The Mishnah also says you're allowed to fill in a hole, meaning a window, with a board on Shabbos. That's a machlokes which we had seen earlier in the Masechta. Is that considered to be building, or is it too temporary to be viewed as building, and does it depend on whether or not it's tied and hanging to the window or not? So the Gemara will discuss that. Okay, so first of all, the Gemara discusses Hafara. Now this Gemara it has two versions. In the first version, we're pretty clear that Hafara and Hatara, the father canceling or the Beis Din canceling, are listed separately. The question is, why are they listed separately? The Mishnah lists them both separately. Is it because Hafara doesn't require a Beis Din and Hatara requires a Beis Din, and therefore it's really different activities? So we list them separately, but the halachos are really the same. You're only allowed to cancel a neder on Shabbos if you need it for Shabbos. Or is the reason it's listed separately because Hafara, you don't need to be L'tzarech Shabbos. Hafara you can cancel even if you don't need it. You don't need to cancel it for Shabbos. Hatara you can only cancel if you need it for Shabbos. So the Gemara says, I'll bring you a proof, because we have a brisa which is said over by Rav Zuti Debei Rav Papa, the smallest one from Rav Papa's family, and his brisa says you're allowed to do hafaras nedarim. A husband's or a father's allowed to cancel a woman's neder, whether it's needed for Shabbos or not. So you clearly see that halacha is different. You're allowed to cancel hafara even if it's not needed for Shabbos. Okay, that's the first version of this. The second version, we're not sure if when it says you're only allowed to cancel nidarim l'tzayrech only if it's needed for Shabbos, is that going back on Hatara or is that also going back on Hafara? Same thing we weren't sure about before. But here we're not interested in whether they're listed separately. Here we are understanding that the two sides of the question: are you allowed to cancel hafaras nidarim? Are you allowed to do hafaras nidarim? Have a man cancel a woman's neder? Are you allowed to do that on Shabbos or not? We understand that the two sides of that question are dependent on what is the time limitation for him to cancel it. If the time limitation is it has to be done that day until sunset, means he can't wait till after Shabbos, then he's allowed to do it on Shabbos. Even if it's not needed, even if it's not a L'tzarech Shabbos thing, that makes sense. He doesn't want to be stuck after Shabbos is over with a problematic neder that she made. If, however, he has 24 hours to do it, so then he could do it even when Shabbos is over, as long as it's within the 24 hours. Then he wouldn't be allowed to do it on Shabbos unless it's needed for Shabbos. Meaning anything which is a neder that he needs to cancel or she needs canceled for Shabbos, so that we understand he's allowed to do it on Shabbos. That's clear. The question of whether he's allowed to cancel nedarim that aren't needed for Shabbos, or will he be able to have a chance to cancel them afterwards? If he can cancel them afterwards, you have no business doing it on Shabbos. If he can't, because he has till sundown on Shabbos, on the day that the neder was made, so then we would say that he's allowed to cancel on Shabbos even if it's not needed for Shabbos, because it has to be done today or it'll be too late. So this is the Gemara's question. And the Gemara again has Zuti Debei Rav Papi, here it's Papi, not Papa, who brings the same price. It says that you're allowed to do hafaras nedarim on Shabbos only if it's l'tzarech Shabbos, only if it's needed for Shabbos. If it's not needed for Shabbos, so then you're not allowed to. That makes it clear that you have 24 hours. You could do it after Shabbos is over as long as it's within 24 hours of when you made the neder itself. So in that, Rav Ashi says, what do you mean? We have a Mishnah that says you have only until sundown. And that Mishnah continues, and it says that sometimes having till sundown means you have a lot of time, and sometimes it means you have a very small amount of time. If she made the neder just before sundown, you just have a few minutes. If she made it just after sundown, you have all the way until sundown the next day. So Gemara says, you're right, there is such a Mishnah, and this Mishnah is also a Mishnah. It's actually a Machlokes Tanoim. We have a brisa that says it clearly. How long do you have to do hafaras nedarim for a man to cancel his wife or daughter's neder? So according to the Tanna Kama, you have until sundown. According to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, you have until 24 hours after the neder was made. Okay, the next thing the Gemara wants to know is this, that we say that you're allowed to do hataras nedarim in a Beis Din for something that's needed in Shabbos. Is that only if you couldn't have accomplished it before Shabbos, or even if you were irresponsible and you could have done it before Shabbos and you didn't, you're still allowed to do it on Shabbos? So the Gemara says that is the case. You're allowed to do it even if you could do it before Shabbos, because Rav Zutra, the son of Rabbi Zera, came to the Chachamim and he needed a neder matred, even though he could have done it before Shabbos, and they still came and they convened and they matred the neder for him on Shabbos. And now the Gemara wants to know, what was the story? We said that they sealed up a window and they used a jug, and they tied a reed to a jug, and they measured a hole. What was going on over there? So the Gemara says there were two houses with a narrow alley between them, and there was a barrel on the roof of the two houses, meaning it went from one roof to the other over this narrow alley, and there was a dead body in the narrow alley. Now the halacha of tumah is as follows: the tumah spreads under the entire roof that it is underneath, even from room to room. So the tumah in this alley would have spread throughout the entire alley under the barrel and the adjacent houses as well. Now it can only get into the adjacent houses if there's a window. If there's a hole in the wall that's as big as the size of a fist. Another thing is that it only spreads through the wall, through the window, if the roof is solid. If there's a hole in the roof that's a tefach by a tefach wide, then the tumah shoots upwards and escapes out through that tefach hole, and there's no din of tumas oil at all. So the Gemara here says as follows: this person was lying in the alley and he was about to die. He was not yet dead, and the people, I guess they knew they couldn't save him, but they wanted to stop the tumah from entering their houses. So first of all, they took a kli jug and they sealed up the window. So from there you see that you're allowed to seal the window on a Shabbos. The next thing that they wanted to do is, I guess they wanted to see if they could take the window out. They wanted to know if the barrel had a crack. Now the barrel did have a crack. The question was the crack big enough to be a tefach by a tefach so that the tumah could escape through that crack, and therefore even if the window wasn't sealed, it wouldn't come into the rooms. So what they did was they took a reed, they tied it to the handle of a clay jug, and they tried to slide it through the crack. If it would fit through the crack, that would mean that it's big enough in order to say that the tumah escaped. Now Rashi explains why did they use a dry reed? Because you're not allowed to tie knots on Shabbos. You're only allowed to tie temporary knots that are definitely not going to last. Now a reed is going to dry out, and it's going to loosen and open by itself, or it'll be animal food, and therefore it'll for sure be eaten or open by itself, and therefore there's no issue. So from there we see those three halachas. You're allowed to seal up the window, you're allowed to tie in this situation where it's temporary, and you're allowed to measure the hole. Okay, now we have the final Gemara, the final piece in Maseches Shabbos. The Gemara says that Ula went to the house of the Reish Gelusa, and he saw that Rabbi Bar Avuna was sitting in a barrel filled with water, and he was measuring the barrel. So he said to him, what are you doing measuring the barrel? The halacha is that you're only allowed to measure a mikvah. A barrel can never be a mikvah, it's a kli. So you're not allowed to measure it. It's not a measurement for a mitzvah. What are you doing? So he said, I'm not measuring because I want to know the sizes. I'm just keeping myself busy. I'm just being misasik ba'alma. Hadron halach misha hichshich v'slik Allah Masechah Shabbos. Hadron halach Masechah Shabbos v'hadrach alon. Datan halach Masechah Shabbos v'datach alon. L'nisna shem yirach Masechah Shabbos v'isisna shem minon le'ba'om ha'dain v'ba'om.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.